When we were first curating this Innotribe at Sibos event, and we saw a number of topics coming up, technology, big data, digital identity, we're thinking to ourselves, there is something else going on here, something deeper, which is not technology related. So we took a risk this year to program a couple of topics which are non-technology related, which have nothing to do with SEPA, which have nothing to do with regulation, and to try to go on the value track. Initially, I thought that the common theme across everything was something along the lines of the connected company, connected teams in company, connected people in companies, and connected value in companies. But when I took a helicopter view, I suddenly saw it, and I could name it, and it was about the reinvention of value.
So what we're going to do in this session is explore. We're going to push hard on different kinds of frameworks. We're going to start with one, and then we're going to go deeper into them.
I have here just a few examples of organizations that clearly are delivering benefits to customers or to users of their services, but using traditional means, traditional metrics, pretty difficult to quantify the benefits that are being delivered by these sorts of organizations. And I settled on two variables that seemed important to me. The first one is refinement, and refinement is the effort dedicated by a producer on behalf of the consumer to make it easier to extract value from a given good or service. And as that occurs, it makes it easier to assign a market value to that service. The second variable is relatedness, and this is basically just the trust between any two parties to a transaction or to an exchange. If we wanted to get a little more technical, we could say it's the degree to which you can engage in intuitive mental bookkeeping. If we combine these two into a matrix, we get 4 quadrants. At the upper left and the lower right, these two are fairly intuitive. The transactional economy is the traditional market economy that we're all familiar with. The relationship economy, I think Jerry's going to talk to you more about, and kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. On the lower left, we have the attention economy, which is unrelated, unrefined. So as with the tweet stream, the value you're getting there is relatively intangible, so it's going to be difficult to engage in kind of firm transactions. But you can engage in more attention economies and accrue reputation or influence or that sort of thing. In the upper right, refined and related, I'm calling that the political economy. And in that case, I'm using refined in the sense of if you're in a political context, you're going to want to emphasize the explicit value, the refined value of a favor you're doing for someone else because you're trying to achieve a firm quid pro quo. You want that favor to be reciprocated to you. Whereas if you're in the relationship economy, you go out to lunch with a friend, you don't show the friend the bill and point out how much money you're spending. You de-emphasize the explicit value of that favor. Boundaries between the quadrants are blurring. Activity can leak from one quadrant to another. And when we talk about new economies, I think what we're talking about is this landscape finding a new equilibrium. And as that activity moves from one quadrant to another, being mediated by a new form of exchange, and that appears to us as a new economy.
My own perspective of the relationship economy is that that's what's happening to the whole economy right now. We're entering a period where trust, where relationships between entities, whether it's individuals, trusted relationships, or between companies and people, and as I'm going to say in a second, many other relationships are shifting like crazy, in particular that relationship between producers and consumers, which we're so accustomed to.
But the statement is all money is valuable, but not all value is monetary. So we must expand our awareness of what value is far beyond what can be articulated by money. And that's where we're going to see this true economy that's boiling around us. This true economy, it does exist. All that value that's disappeared as Greg says, it does exist. $40 trillion of it is out there. It's invisible. Now, how do we make this value visible? Every bank has an accounting system. They count every single penny. They're supposed to know where everything is. But we don't have a knowledge inventory. This is a stunning omission, absolutely stunning omission. We don't know what we know. Now, this knowledge inventory we could talk about later, not enough time now, but it needs to format knowledge in the form of a financial instrument. That means it has to have a quality and a quantity associated with it, because that's how an asset is defined. Each knowledge element needs to have a quality and quantity associated. If it's an asset, people will trade it.
I'm talking about an intention economy is when it grows not around guesses about what people want. This is what Facebook and Google are working on right now. We can guess so well at what you want. We know you totally. No, you don't. You don't at all. And there's this sense in all of us that we're not being heard and we're not really operating in this intention economy that's out, this attention economy that's out there. Every company has one server and all these clients. They want scale. They want zillions of these. Oh, client server gives you scale, and scale is this wonderful thing you're supposed to have if you're on the sell side of things. The problem is the scale isn't very personal. And every company has its own set of calf-cow relationships, and that's all our loyalty cards, where all these companies imagine, we're going to increase your switching costs by giving you a loyalty card that makes it harder for you to shop somewhere else. And we're going to overcharge the people who are not members. We're going to give you the discounts that are only called discounts. It's a lot of bullshit, but there it is, you know, and they're all working that way. So that's why we created VRM. The idea behind VRM, which is vendor relationship management, it's the reciprocal of customer relationship management. Most of us are familiar with what that is. It's not opposed to it, but it should engage with it. And VRM tools liberate customers and vendors and build the intention economy. The key thing is with VRM, the customer drives. Probably the best VRM instrument we have right now is an automobile, because it's ours. When we're in our cars, we're not subject to anybody else. You know, we have that sense of independence, right? So with VRM, the individual is the point of integration for their own data and the point of origination for what gets done with it. So you can be able to manage many different relationships at the same time.
I like the discussion and the chart you've got here about the new economy models and how they're blurring and merging. But what struck me straight away at the start is that the transaction economy is where we sit in terms of SWIFT and banking and transaction banking. And that was the one that was targeted as saying it's unrelated. So everyone talks about relationship banking, but we don't have a relationship because it's unrelated. So are we of a view, therefore, or are you of a view, that the financial community can start to branch out into the other economies and become more related through these blurring of lines?
My own take is that there's a huge opportunity to actually create value out of all sorts of different relationships. Some relationships need not to be monetized, so there's some things that are completely implicit that are just, you know, somebody did something, it's personal history, and if you put a number next to that, that's kind of a turn-off to the whole thing. If you go to a friend's house and offer them a $100 bill at the end of dinner, that's considered bad protocol. But there's a bunch of other places in the world where banks and anybody who's dealing now only in fiat currencies could in fact expand, including all the way over to if somebody promises to learn accounting to a certain level in a year and they pass a test and someone can attest to the fact that they did, or lose 10 pounds, that's a promise made and kept. That feels like a piece of your creditworthiness in a way. It's a behavioral aspect. So there are lots of different places where this might work.
I'll just expand the point a little bit further, because where I'm coming from is we trust, or some people trust, Facebook withholding their family information and photographs, etc. And yet Facebook is not really a trusted, secure vault, is it? Whereas banks are. So I guess where I'm coming from is, should banks be stretching themselves into being far more trusted vaults of data storage for clients rather than monetary storage? And is that the way they can get into these other economies?
That is a good dinner conversation with a couple glasses of wine, because there's so many layers of meaning there and so forth.
I think there's this calls for is and logic, not or. Okay, in other words, I think that the advantages that banks have at the transactional level is base infrastructure that we're going to need no matter what. And I don't think what's going on now in the world requires that banks suddenly embrace or become Facebook or anything like that, but rather do better what they're already doing in an economy that's changing, because there are many more actors doing many more things in it and many more kinds of value being cared for. But the role that banks play, you know, is as curatorially, regulatorily, and many other kinds of adverbs wise, shouldn't change. Actually, I think we're always going to need that role, no matter what else happens, and that's kind of banks larger than an ace in a hole.
We'll take a few minutes for reflection now. You've heard a proposal for a model. You've heard a couple of examples of this model. You have tablecloths on which you can write. I would invite anybody who is alone at the table to join another table, please, and discuss a little bit with your colleagues around. What did you hear? How does it fit? How doesn't it fit? Does this model differentiate sufficiently? Does it not? Would you change it in some ways? You have an assignment actually on your table to kind of get you stimulated a little bit what you think about. Take a few minutes of reflection, write on the tablecloth, we'll share afterwards what you came up with.
The topic is rich, so what you should do is make dinner dates with the people at your table. So you can continue this conversation at your leisure with more space to breathe into the topics, because this is very rich.
What I want to talk about is actually the secret DNA of markets and economies, like actually the underlying dynamics out of which these kinds of things emerge. Because I'm less interested in categorization than I am about being able to build them, being able to actually design them from the ground up and have them work the way we intend them to work. I'm a currency designer. I actually essentially do social engineering with incentives, with different ways of measuring value, making it visible, with being able to transact or interact around that value, and how that, and actually intentionally alter social dynamics with that. When you're trying to engineer your corporate culture, for example, your incentives and compensation affect that. How is it that you actually want to measure performance and, you know, be able to provide incentives to people? We typically look at that in a fairly shallow way and look at it only in terms of money, and typically that's actually not what resonates with people most. The good news is that we have, you currently operate, banking currently operates in the space where you're creating a currency. You actually could be very influential in creating some of the next ones. There's new models of wealth necessary that people are clamoring for, and you're hearing some of it being discussed here. The bad news is, of course, it's going to happen whether you're doing it or not. So the question is really, how can banking really keep itself relevant in the emerging types of value?
Baking your business model into an API is an economic imperative. What that means is that you need to figure out what it is that you do as a business, get it accessible and programmatic to everybody else.
How do you know what an API is?
Application Program Interface. That means someone needs to be able to get to your core competence from another program and do something with it. And what they do with it is none of your business. ProgrammableWeb.com is a company that tracks the number of companies that are making APIs that are access to their data. RESTful API, it's just a way of making an API that works, that uses existing technology.
Do you know if there's any bank APIs in that 7,000?
No. Any other questions? Figure out who it is. Apogee, Mashery, there's a half a dozen companies whose business it is to teach you how to do APIs. They can help you make that happen. I got to tell you, it's going to happen with you or without you.
Thank you very much, Craig.
So Pakistan is what I call a functional economy. Okay? The challenge here is survival, a very basic level. India is becoming an aspirational economy. It's very much about consumerism. Look at me, see my power, see what I own, see what I have, look at my status signaling. And we're kind of stuck there too. Is there a more meaningful way to build an economy? And I see these three things as rungs in a ladder: a functional economy, aspirational economy, and a meaningful economy. So what do I think a meaningful economy will look like? I think it's actually much less about building a new economy than about revisiting ideas about economics from the dawn of time. I think it's going to be very much about the ancient Greek concept of eudaimonia, living meaningfully well. What makes a life worth living? What do real riches consist of? Your list would probably include a lot more than money, right? Probably include relationships, probably include this full gamut of things that I call smarter, fitter, tougher, closer, wiser. So this is eudaimonic wealth. The question for us now is, how do we create eudaimonic wealth? Because when we actually look at our economies through a eudaimonic lens, they are not just suffering, they are doing very, very badly. And so I think we have to think bigger, and I think we have to think sharper. And if you ask me, what is this great transition going to look like? I'll say to you, I think that we're going to have to fundamentally re-engineer the institutions of the global economy to create, to seed, nurture, and cultivate eudaimonic wealth. I think we're going to have to build new measures of national wealth, updated measures of GDP to do it. I think that is the great challenge of today, and I do not think that that is the challenge of getting America out of a recession. I think that we are now on the cusp of a quantum leap, and I think it's going to take a decade or more for us to build these eudaimonic institutions.
Can you say that sentence again, Umair? You said it quickly.
In Bentham's utilitarian calculus.
Thank you.
Okay, how near-term pleasure do I get out of a thing? And you're absolutely right. The world does need hedonic wealth. But there are two questions that follow. One is, do we have enough resources in the world to provide everybody with American levels of hedonic wealth, which is what seems to be the quest many nations are on? And the second is there more for us than mere hedonic wealth, right? Because you ask me, why do we need a global financial system and a currency to do this? Well, what is a currency? Currency is a claim on wealth, right? So what kind of wealth does our currency lay claim to at the moment? Right now, we optimize for more, bigger, faster, cheaper. And that's what we get. We don't get any eudaimonic wealth. Let me give you two examples of countries who I think are already building a very key eudaimonic institution. And what they are doing is updating this hulking industrial age colossus known as GDP to begin including social and environmental costs. Those countries are not the US and UK. Those countries are not France and Germany. Those countries are China and India, right? They don't have a century of this kind of aspirational economy behind them. And so they may be able to leapfrog us. I think for us, the question is a very sharp and very pointed one. Do we have the institutional capacity to build eudaimonic financial institutions? I think, in fact, the answer may be that we need to update our institutions of democracy first.
Go ahead, finish that sentence, Umair.
I was just going to say, going back to and that takes me back to the second question, right? Which is, what kind of institutions existed in the ancient world to bring eudaimonia to life? Well, all kinds of crazy institutions existed, right? I mean, the Spartans had this kind of extreme schooling system. The Athens had some very interesting kind of national, city-statewide tournaments and educational kind of battles, okay? They all have very interesting institutions, but I think there's less we can learn from them today than just to plow ahead into the future and begin updating our own institutions ourselves. I think the future is an open question right now. And if we think that it is impossible to build eudaimonic institutions, we need only look at China and India, for they're already taking on the challenge.
Thanks, Umair.